Nah, 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 nah. Nothing will ever be the same. Nah, 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 nah. Cause I came, nah, 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 nah. To let them know they name. Nah, 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 nah. They all feel with shame. Nah, 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 nah. But I'm in my own lane. Nah, 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 nah. So we're ready for the fame. Nah, 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 nah. They're looking for someone to blame. No, 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 no. But that's why I came. No, 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 no. These libs don't got a brain. No, 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 no. They mad because I got a 10 out of 10 dame. No, 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 no. Okay, so let's just go anyways. Ooh, what's going on here? Bunch of haters. Welcome to another episode of The Truth Rebellion, where we don't bow, we don't bend, we don't break, and we speak what they silence. In a world where lies are law, truth is rebellion. We don't bow, we don't bend, we speak what they silence. But that's really what it's like, though, isn't it? It's crazy. It's so crazy, but it's so true, and I know it as well as you do, too. So, that's what it is. That's why we're here. Now, like I said, bro, like I've said many times, if you're offended, you should probably leave. If you're easily offended, then you probably should go. But also, in all actuality and reality, we would rather actually have you talk. We would rather have you speak, because here at the Truth Rebellion, we don't believe in censoring or silencing anybody. Crazy, I know, right? Because we're not communists, right? We're not dictators or tyrants, so we're working on getting many people on the show, many guests on the show. I'm already talking to like a couple dozen people probably. And there's some really, really interesting names on there, so it should be really interesting, actually. And people from all different walks of life, broski, like, from all different walks of life, really. We cover every sphere, political, cultural, spiritual, everything you can think of. And like I said, anything from the far right to the far left. It doesn't matter, because we believe in freedom. And so therefore, as a matter of fact, if someone disagrees, instead of being offended, they should just come and state their opinion and have a debate in front of everybody. Or, they could have a debate. That's fine with me. I'm not afraid of anybody. Or some people, they may disagree. And I know a lot of people are intimidated by the word debate. And I can understand why, because usually people just spout out a bunch of nonsense and they kind of back you up in a corner. And as a reason for that, they kind of make the rules and make it sound as if any opinion that you have is not, rooted in authenticity, just because you don't, just because somebody may not have on paper exactly all the resources that they got from it. It's understandable why people would be intimidated by that word. But everybody has an opinion. Everybody's free to have an opinion. But so maybe if not the word debate, all you do is state your opinion and how you feel. And you don't even, and we just let you talk so that, you can say what you think. And maybe, or if you're somewhere in the middle, which, spoiler alert, 90% of people are somewhere in the middle between far left and far right. In fact, I actually believe that far left in this country makes up less than 10, maybe I was going to say less than 10% of people, but, maybe it makes up even less than that. Maybe it's like, I don't know. I kind of feel like it's more towards the 1 or less percentile. And far right, actual far right, not the neo-Nazi accusing everybody who's ever supported Donald Trump or accusing Trump or Elon of being far right. No, I'm talking about the actual far right, actual Nazis. And maybe you could put Nick Fuentes into that conversation, right? Maybe. That's not an accusation, because I understand that Nick Fuentes is also a giant troll. So, it's possible that he just does that because he's trying to get everybody to listen and pay attention to him, and people just don't realize it. It's satirical. But if he does put himself into that role, which I would suspect that if he's actually far right, that he does, because far right people are never ashamed of calling themselves far right and are always extremely outspoken about being far right. I have never met a Nazi or seen a KKK member that does not outspokenly tell the entire world, hey, I'm a Nazi. Here's all my tattoos to prove it, and this is why I think that white people are superior to all other races, right? I have never in my life seen any real white supremacist that has ever been afraid to say that they were an authentic white supremacist. I've never seen it. And that group, the actual far right, they make up 10% or less. And I really think, same with the far left, that it's probably more like 0.1%. Most people in the United States of America fall somewhere in between. Let's just give it an over-exemplimentary issue, right? Let's say that at most it's 10% on both sides. So that would leave 80% of the United States not far left or far right. And like I said, I think giving the far left and the far right 10% is a big over-exaggeration. I think it's high leniency level to give them that. But if we just said they did and that 80% weren't there, I would say out of that 80%, that maybe 25% fall on the center right, which would be like traditional GOP standards, and 25% fall on the center left, which would be pre-woke Democratic Party, right? And then like Bill Maher, I would say, is probably there. And then 30% would fall somewhere between the middle and switch their vote any election anyway, depending on who's running for office and who they want to vote for, right? I would say that would be more of a fair makeup of the entire political spectrum of 300 million Americans, not counting illegals, because illegals are not Americans and don't have the right to vote, no matter what Governor Newscum and Mom Dummy from NYC believe. But with that being said, and I actually believe that probably 70 to 80% of the country actually voted for Donald Trump. That will offend a lot of people, but who cares? I mean, I'm pretty sure it's the truth. And so what I believe is that, but the mainstream news media, and and really, let's just be honest with it, the CIA and the FBI and the NSA and all those intelligence agencies, mixed with communist propaganda, all the intelligence agencies from China and from India and from all of the Muslim nations, Iran, etc., and European nations, and the New World Order, globalism and New World Order, the World Economic Forum and the UN and all of those people, all of them mixed together is what promotes the propaganda of the so-called legacy or mainstream news media, which are really just a bunch of Operation Mockingbird pre-programmed programs to say whatever they say so that everybody listens. You know what I mean. Rehashing points that they're told to say, which has already been proven multiple times. This has already been proven. It's like, it's a conspiracy. It wasn't a conspiracy before the news came out. It was true before it was proven. And there was evidence of it before it was proven, called yellow journalism, called you ever heard of the Vietnam War, called you ever heard of Cuba? Like, come on now. Like, have you never heard of how the FBI tried to assassinate multiple political targets all the way through the 60s? You never heard of MK Ultra and how the CIA was trying to use LSD and psychedelic drugs to brainwash people? You never heard of these things? They've been out public information for years. But now, if you were one of those people that was stupid enough to say, well, the government did that back then, but they don't do it now. That was a once upon a time thing, but it's not a thing now. If you were dumb enough to believe that, then you turn to all the modern information like, oh, yeah, by the way, the 2016 investigation into them saying that Donald Trump was swayed the election by Vladimir Putin in Russia, who he called a paper tiger, by the way, and is in dictations with war with. They came out and said, oh, yeah, by the way, the FBI and the CIA and all these people, they were telling the news media what to report on and were releasing classified documents that they didn't even have the right to release, which is illegal, and absolutely distributed them to the mainstream news medias, CNN, etc. So many. We have an official list that tells you how many it was. So many. And then lied about it so they could get FISA reports, and then lied about that, and then went after General Michael Flynn, and basically con jobbed their way into that. Michael Flynn lied under oath. Michael Flynn didn't actually lie under oath, bro. It's just a load of crap, bro. If you understand how the FBI works. Basically, let me show you how the FBI works, okay? This is a well-known FBI tactic, and you need to understand this, because if the FBI ever talks to you, you have to understand this, okay? You see these pair of headphones right here? They're red, okay? Now, let's say that I'm talking to you right now, and now 10 minutes later, the FBI comes in here, and the FBI says, Josh, tell me everything that happened in the last 10 minutes, word for word, verbatim, right? And let's say that I actually do tell them every single thing that happened, and I got every single detail right, and I said it word for word, verbatim, and told you everything I just told you. And then they said, now what color were those headphones that were on the microphone right there? And I said, and I just couldn't remember for a second, right? My mind went blank, and I was like, oh, crap. Out of everything we were talking about, all the political conversations and all of that, and the FBI and the CIA and all this, there's so much information there. I really just was not trying to pay attention to the fact of what color the headphones were that were sitting right there on the table. So I'm thinking really hard, and I'm like, maybe they were blue or something. And then the FBI will say, oh, they were blue, huh? And then they'll go and they'll take the headphones out and they'll say, well, we got them right here and they were red. Now that's called lying under oath because you got one detail incorrect. Then they'll go on to their little FBI report and they'll type in lied under oath, perjury. And then when they report it to the mainstream news media and they try to get you subpoenaed through Congress and all this other kind of nonsense, what they'll do is they'll never say, well, he got 99% of the story correct, word for word, verbatim, but he didn't actually lie about anything that he said. But what he did was that we kind of tricked him with a stupid question that we knew nobody was paying attention to, like what color are the headphones? And then he said blue because he wasn't paying attention. And that's what we did. That's why he's lying under oath that we got him verbatim. He's lying about the details of the story. That's what they'll actually do. But instead of saying that, right, they'll just be like, well, we grilled him in a really hard FBI interview for an hour and a half and grilled him on every single subject humanly imaginable. And we found out later that he was intentionally deceiving and misleading with completely counter alternative facts to the actual details of the story, and therefore he was lying under oath, and there must be a whole nother smoking gun under here, and really that is proof that Donald Trump rigged the 2020 election with Vladimir Putin, and he's trying to hide the entire thing from us and everybody and doesn't want anybody to hear it, and now everybody go get him. And then what happens is that hits the mainstream news media. They still never tell you he got the color of the headphones wrong. And then by the time like 6 months goes by, 90% of the entire country has heard he lied under oath. And then when the truth starts coming out, right, sadly enough, at least 1/3 of that 90%, 33% of that 90%, right? They are going to never change their mind about it whatsoever because of their preconceived notions and biases and their hatred and their bigotry and all this. Because they hate you or what specifically you were saying or advocating for, whose side you're on. They are going to believe that testimony no matter what. Even if the whole thing gets blown off and we work the whole thing out, they will never forget the fact that they heard from the FBI and the national news media that you lied under oath, and that's now what they believe no matter what information comes out opposite. So you have that people. Then 33% of the people wake up and say they actually have to waste 6 months of their life digging through all the information just to get to the root of the story that the FBI and the CIA, the intelligence agencies, and the mainstream news media didn't want them to hear. And then they figure out, they get the transcripts of the interview and everything, and they say, wait a minute, the only thing that happened here was that he said that the headphones were blue when they were actually red. And then they're like, I have a hard time believing that Josh intentionally tried to tell them that they were a separate color. Maybe it's just because he was talking for an hour about politics and political and geopolitical spectrums and all that, and he just probably didn't even remember what color the headphones were. And then it takes 6 months for that 33% to become awake enough to figure that out, and now they're fighting over the last 33% to help them understand, because those people, they're not totally brainwashed to where they'll never believe that it was a lie, but now they're just confused and they don't know what to believe. And now they're caught between, was he really lying under oath, or was the headphones actually blue? And now this 33% over here that knows the details, like me, that knows what actually happened with Michael Flynn, that knows what actually happened with the mainstream news media, the FBI, James Comey, the CIA, James Clapper, and all of that Russia nonsense, and that Donald Trump is actually telling the 100% truth. Like, I know you hate Donald Trump and you'll never believe anything opposed to what he said just because of your hatred for him, but he is telling the truth, right? And if you would, if you would actually dedicate your life to becoming a better human being, which means going out of your way to verify every detail before you spread a story, you would find out that he was telling the truth too. And that's the reason why we all voted for Donald Trump. Okay, so anyways, so you have the 33% that know, like me, that are trying their hardest to get the other 33% to realize that that third 33% is just going to believe it just because the news media said it, and here we have all the proof, and then that's what happens, and that's your Elon Musks of the world who go in by Twitter and say, oh yeah, by the way, not only were they lying straight to the mainstream news media, but here's all the evidence that they were lying to all the social media groups too, which we kind of already knew, because the only posts that they ever censored or took down were always right-wing posts, or even center posts, people that are not considered right-wing but are down the middle, and the only thing that they ever did not propagandize was the far left. Those are the only people that they ever allowed to have a conversation ever, and you would get attacked by hordes of demon woke zombies. And now we understand that half of those people, actually probably more, 90% of them were bots, and they're not even real people that are coming up with these ideas. Like Joe Rogan had an interesting take on the whole thing, right? Joe Rogan was saying, and that's interesting. I never really thought about that before, but it's probably true. Where it's like, you know what they say? They say that like 70% of these people that are constantly arguing and debating on social media with each other, like, they're not even real people. They're actually bots. Like, they literally create bots to argue complete far left arguments, like cutting children's genitalia off and believing in 69 genders, and you could have sex with a dog, and then you become that's bestiality, but they'll come up with some word for it because bestiality is a bigoted term, and they'll call it like whatever, they'll make a sexuality for it. Is dog washality, and if you don't like that, then that's because you're a bigoted racist. And if you don't, and now they're fighting for the rights to marry their dog. And if you don't subscribe and succumb to that right there, well, then you're censored and canceled off of social media. And the truth is that 0.1% of people maybe in the entire world believe that, right? But so they'll make 3 million bots that all pretend to believe that and just have them constantly regurgitating the same information on the internet just to get it trending so that people think that it's a bigger debate than it actually is. And then they'll go on to the other side and create 3 million more bots who will are actually far-right Nazis who are screaming out to create a second Holocaust and death to all the Jews and all this, and say that they're all a bunch of KKK members and white supremacists, and then go out and endorse everybody that argues against the fact that you should marry your dog, so that it looks like it's this far-right movement that doesn't want you to marry dogs, and this far-left movement that actually believes it's a good idea to marry dogs, right? And I was like, oh, well, that's interesting. And that's probably a lot more correlated to the truth than people think that it is. Right? That's very interesting, isn't it? And then, of course, you'll have your real people that debate that. But like I said, that's 0.1% of the population, right? And now the mainstream news media, because they're completely controlled, will sit there and they'll ignore everybody in the middle that says, we don't really believe either one of these, we kind of think it's crazy to marry your dogs. And we kind of actually think it's pretty insane to say that if you don't want to marry your dogs, then that means that you are a white supremacist that hails Hitler and goes on and wants to kill all the Jews with a Holocaust. We kind of think that both of those are a little redundant. And what in hell, quite literally, hell, do marrying your dogs and Adolf Hitler have to do with each other, right? And the news media will ignore those people, what we call the common sense people, what we call 90 to 99% of every actual living, breathing American citizen. They'll say that we'll ignore those people and then we'll put 90% of our news coverage on that marrying your dogs and death to all Jews, and then we'll make it appear as if these are the only two groups, the only two avenues. And if you don't want to kill all Jews, it's because you want to have sex with your dog. And if you don't want to have sex with your dog, it's because you want to kill all Jews. And then that's the way that they push that media, right? I mean, that's exactly what it is. Like, for sure, 100%, that is exactly how it works. And, so that's what it is. And it's so ridiculous and monotonous, isn't it? It's so crazy. But it's the truth. I mean, that's what it is. That's what we're living in. That's called government propaganda. That's exactly what that is. Now, as a result of that, everyone who's down the middle, who doesn't believe all that, now they would never dream of getting into a debate about what they actually think because they're terrified about the fact that their words are going to be twisted or they're going to be put into some kind of whatever it is and blah, 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 blah. Which is why here at the Truth Rebellion, that's the name of this show, we do not censor, silence, bend, bold, or break, and we don't tell people what to think. We tell them the truth, and we don't censor anybody either, which is why if somebody is far left and they want to come on the show, cool, I don't care. Or if they're far right and they want to come on the show, cool, I don't care, because we'll let them, talk all they want to, because it's my firm belief that when people see the whole truth, they make the best decisions for themselves, which means that if you have like a very far left person that worships Satan in the closet in their meantime and wants to marry their dog, and they come on the show and do a whole giant spectacle about that's what they actually believe, then it's my firm belief that the majority of people that hear that will just be like, you know what? I don't want to marry my dog and I don't worship the devil. So therefore, I think that the far left actually wants to marry their dog and worship their devil. And then for that reason, I polarize away from the far left. And similarly with the far right, I don't really think that we should kill all Jews and that we should make Hitler some sort of a God in the flesh, tribunal of all that there is that could ever be, so maybe I stay away from that person because they actually believe in the far right. You know what I mean? Like, that's why we don't censor anybody, because really, in a sense, I think that they're giving themselves enough rope to hang themselves, right? And constant debate between the sides, letting everybody speak for what they really think. And here's what I'm really trying to say, okay? I know that we may have, quote unquote, left guests or liberals or whatever you want to call them that speak. What I also know, because I know a lot of people that are on that side of the wagon, right? As right-wing as I am, they want to call me right-wing, whatever. And really, I'm actually a patriot, and that's kind of where we are. This is, so far beyond politics, and most people understand that, right? But if they come on the show, and I know so many of them, I know that deep down at their core, the majority of these people are not a bunch of communists that want to put everybody into slavery and want to force everybody to worship Satan and marry their dog. Most of them have a genuine motivation for why they feel the way they do. And a lot of it could do with empathy and various other subjects. Like me, myself, once upon a time, who was way more subscribed to the idea and theory of socialism than capitalism, for sure. But it was because of a lack of education and understanding, and a lack of really understanding that socialism was like a Trojan horse used by people to manipulate empathetic people to overturn capitalism to bring tyranny. But it was because of empathy that I was more subscribed to that notion. And there's a lot of people, still even now, that have completely wrong views about things and are completely on the wrong side of the wagon, but it's because of their empathy and ignorance as opposed to actual malicious ill intent, right? So that's why it's important to let those people talk so that you can see their heart motive, right? That's what you're looking for. You're not necessarily looking for somebody's viewpoints as much as you're looking for their heart motive. And the reason why I say that is this. Like, for instance, if you look at Russell Brand, right? Russell Brand, let's rewind the clocks back 2, 3, 4 years, right? Russell Brand was not a Christian. He did not talk about Jesus, no more in the sense that he talked about every other religion under the sun as correlated in equality with Christ, right? And more of a New Age guy, right? Spirituality, talk about Buddhism, Hinduism, the monks, the Shaolin monks, all these kind of things. All these different things, chakras, crystals, More in that lane of wagon, you would say Russell Brand was. And also describes himself as far left. Uses the words far left. And what he actually says is, I'm way farther left than any political spectrum you've ever seen, which is why I don't disagree with that, which is why I don't like any of them. Throw away the Republican and the Democratic Party, right? That's what Russell Brand used to say. And that he was more into creating a revolution and to create all sorts of new platforms that create new opportunities for political spectrums, blah, 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 blah. And I understand where he's coming from, okay? So, but if you listen to that and you're like a MAGA patriot, unless your name is Candace Owens, who went to talk to Russell Brand despite his belief, right? If you're listening to that, you're like, far left? What? You don't agree with this, that, and the other thing. What? Right? And then if you go specifically and purely by ideological outspoken preference, you'll be deceived into thinking that some bad guys are good guys and some good guys are bad guys. So if you went by pure ideological preference, you would think that Mitch McConnell and Mitt Romney were closer to the right thing, and I mean morally right, are closer to what should be happening, what's supposed to happen, than Russell Brand, because Russell Brand calls himself farther left than any political spectrum you could ever see. But in reality, at the heart level, Russell Brand is a good guy, and he was quote-unquote farther left than ever because he's coming from a genuine place filled with actual integrity and moral ethics, and he really does want to create a place that's far better than any political or economical situation that we've ever seen before. 100%. And Mitt Romney and Mitch McConnell are not patriots that are trying to save the country, and that's why they wind up on the right wing. They're a bunch of hardcore GOP political politician hags that are in more close correlation to the World Economic Forum, the UN, and the actual far right and actual far left, malicious intent, your Joseph Stalins and communists, your Cory Booker's or Nancy Pelosi's of the world. That's who they run with. That's their crew, right? And if you're going by pure ideological outspokenness, you're going to get confused and think, there's this right versus this left, you know? And then you're going to think, Russell's not a good guy because he's over here and these people are, and it's the exact opposite. So I don't go by pure ideological preference. What I go by is the heart, motivation, and intent, transparency, and integrity of a human being. Because that person, I know, like I used to say with Russell Brand all the time, and I was always for Russell Brand, and I always listened to Russell Brand, and I always promoted Russell Brand far before he was outspokenly talking about Christ and all these kinds of things. And the reason why is because I could tell when I listened to Russell Brand, I was not picking up a political mantra. I was not picking up this political ideology of trying to promote certain ideas and policies and ideological preferences. And he was basically just not mocking out and rehearsing and speaking something he had been taught by somebody else to promote somebody else's agenda like a little puppet, right? When I heard him talk, I said, this guy is authentically real. He's the real deal. He actually means what he says, and his opinions are the opinions of Russell Brand, not the opinions of some crazy, not the opinions of a bunch of politicians that are behind him that are actually telling him what to say for their behalf, or the opinions of some organization or something like the UN or the World Economic Forum, and he's rehashing what they want him to say, or the opinions of some propagandist big business or whatever it is that are pushing him to say some certain direction. No, Russell Brand is actually speaking on behalf of Russell Brand and what he actually believes. Strongly opinionated, strongly passionate, from a place of empathy, wants to actually change things to make things better. Therefore, I trust him. I don't care if we have a different idea in our head of how to get there. What I care about is the fact that he actually wants to get to the same place that I do. He just has a different way of how he thinks that would bring it into existence, right? And essentially in the United States of America, years ago, 10, 20, 30, 40, I don't even want to say 10 or 20 or 30, maybe you got to go all the way back to like the 60s, like your JFK timeline. That's how it was in America once upon a time. Nobody was disagreeing with the fact America should be a sovereign, great nation and that they should be protected from their enemies and that they should have borders and that they should be anti-communism. No one was disagreeing with that. The only divide between the right and the left back then, the Republicans and Democrats, was we have different ideas of how to get there. The same divide that you might find between a MAGA Republican who thinks, or like a constitutional Republican, like Charlie Kirk, who thinks we want to get to this better society and this is how we do it, and a Russell Brand, we want to get to that same better society, but this is how we do it over here. Russell Brand's idea, throw the whole thing away and restart from the ground up. Charlie Kirk's idea, the immediate foundation of the United States was perfect, and the Founding Fathers did exactly what you said, Russell Brand. They threw the whole thing away and started from fresh. The only problem is that we stopped listening to them and we started to build a foundation that went opposite to what they said. And if we get back down to the basics of the Constitution, we're already creating that society. We just have to follow what they said and not what we've turned it into. But both of them have the heart motivation of getting it to a better society. So that's why I listen to Charlie Kirk and I listen to Russell Brand. Now, what I don't believe is that Nancy Pelosi and the Cory Bookerts and the AOCs of the world and those people, that they desire that. I believe that they desire evil. They desire tyranny and control and censorship. And I believe the same about Mitch McConnell and Mitt Romney and the so-called GOP. And because I believe that, I say I reject the Nancy Pelosi's and the Democratic Party, the Hillary Clintons of the world. And I reject the Mitch McConnell and the Mitt Romney types of the world. I reject them both because I don't find authenticity, integrity in either of them. So I reject them both. So, and now you see, as years have gone on, and I say too because I'm a Christian as well, I would say, someone like Russell Brand, and I said this long before he ever said anything about Christ. God, God knows, and people around me know too because I told them. If somebody actually has a heart to find the full truth, because that's what I'm looking for. I'm looking for people with the actual motivation to find what's actually true. That's why the name of the place is called The Truth Rebellion, right? And when I say since Russell Brand actually has a heart motivation to find the actual truth, therefore, I know if he follows down that wagon long enough, because what I know as a believer, as a Christian, as someone that believes in the Lord Jesus Christ and has encountered the actual God of the entire universe, someone who knows the truth and has encountered the truth, who is a person, I am the way, the truth, and the life. No man comes to the Father except through me. You shall know the truth, and the truth shall set you free. The Lord Jesus Christ. As someone who has encountered him, I know that he's the ultimate truth, and that's where all truth ends up and lies. So when I see someone whose heart motivation is actually to find the truth, I know that if they uncompromisingly go down that lane and wagon long enough, they will always wind up at the foot of the Lord Jesus Christ at the cross, because he is the way, the truth, and the life. No man comes to the Father except through him. Which is why I would look at Russell Brand and I said, eventually this guy's going to find Jesus. This guy's going to wind up a Christian, and it's going to shock a lot of people. And I used to say all that years before it happened. And then out of nowhere, of course, we see Russell Brand makes the video. I've recently, I've had a lot of spiritualities, and I look into a lot of spiritualities, but I recently have found that the closest thing to my spirituality would have to be the Lord Jesus Christ, right? And it starts off like that, and then it turns into baptism, and then it turns out to now where Russell Brand is completely on fire, and he's shouting Jesus Christ from the rooftops because he's a born-again Christian and a believer in Jesus. Praise the Lord. Hallelujah. So, that's why I invite any and all people onto the show, whether they're far left, actually, or far right, actually, and everything and anything in between. Whatever they are, it doesn't really matter to me, as long as, you don't want actual psychopathic people on there that want to kill everybody. But you understand what I'm saying. We invite everybody onto the show because I believe, and from what I know from many people that I know that are left-wing and whatever else and everything in between, the majority of people that I know that are that way, at their core basis, is an intent for empathy and what's right. And I feel like that when those people are allowed to speak their full opinion, even if you disagree with their ideological preference, if they're allowed to talk long enough, you'll be able to discern and come to the wisdom and the knowledge of the fact that this person actually wants what's right and the right thing for a situation, and they're not a maliciously intended, evil, wicked person. And I believe that understanding is the hope for unity that the United States of America has, right? And the whole world. I believe that the thing that will create hope and unity once upon a time and eventually will is the knowledge that the integrity and actual intent of people is a righteous cause. I believe that when the people are able to pop out of the propaganda network, that they really have malicious intent for each other and are able to pop into the idea that at the core of this is a desire for truth, righteousness, and justice. That will create more unity and will destroy more propaganda and will take more veils off of the eyes of people than anything else can and will. Does that make sense? That's exactly what I believe. And that's why I don't censor anybody. Russell Brand is a good example. And I also believe, and no, I'm not just saying that because Russell Brand is a Christian now, right? Because some people would even say that. Oh, it's easy to say now because Russell Brand talks about Jesus. Well, and what I want to say first before I address that is that Charlie Kirk, Russell Brand, both have different ideas to get to the same place. In that conversation, I understand both sides of the story, and I will say that I am more aligned with Charlie Kirk on that idea than Russell Brand's idea. Now, let me speak and say this. I was more aligned with Russell Brand's idea, for sure, as a fact. That's the way that I was raised, bro. That's who I was. Throw the entire thing down and rebuild from the bottom up. Justice for the poor, justice for those who are outlawed by society, justice, right? That's who I was. That's all me. That's who I still am at the core deeps and depths of my basis, man. But the reason why I say I'm more aligned with Charlie Kirk on the subject is not because I'm opposed to the idea that there's a possibility that there's greater political or economical spectrums, but because I believe after I listened to Charlie Kirk and Candace Owens really talk about the Constitution and really talk about taxation as theft and abolish the IRS, and they were explaining the difference between rights and taxes for things like libraries and firehouses and streets than for other things. And when I really listened to the core debates of Charlie Kirk, I started to be persuaded that there was a correct truth there, where he was saying, yeah, the founding fathers actually are the epitome of going and creating an entire thing from the ground up. What you're describing when you say we need to go somewhere else and create a government from the ground up, you're actually describing the founding fathers. It already happened. It was in 1776. And I was like, and I'm thinking and I'm debating all these ideas in my head. And then when he's talking about, and then when I started to really listen to the arguments, I started to become persuaded, by the fact that I think that's honestly actually true. Because when you look at the history and you look at everything and you see that there was no income tax, there were no taxes when the founding fathers were built. And when you listen to the words that came out of their mouth, right? Like Benjamin Franklin, when he said, those who want freedom, those who want security over freedom deserve neither. Yeah, that's an anti-socialistic communistic approach. That's an quote-unquote Patriot Act. It's not so patriotic, but, they use words to confuse people. We could get into that. So what should be called the Non-Patriotic Act, which was signed after 9/11, which violates the Fourth Amendment to give people the ability to spy. It gives the NSA the ability to spy on its citizens and not use searches and warrants, which is a direct violation of the Fourth Amendment of the United States of America. But because people traded their freedom for their security, directly in violation to Benjamin Franklin, we got the NSA and Edward Snowden. And that's Edward Snowden came out and said, oh, yeah, by the way, they're actually breaking the Fourth Amendment. Here you go. And Ron Paul, not Rand Paul, but Ron Paul, R-O-N Paul, I saw him sit on a stage a long time ago and tell the world that if you let this thing pass, it's going to be used on American citizens within the next 20 years. Everybody laughed at him. Oh, you must be a Democrat because you're saying that, and that's the problem right there. It's easy to say that you're for something when it's happening, even though it's not true. And then we look back in 20 years and everybody forgets the fact that you stayed integritous and that you said what you actually believed and didn't go with the hype, and you weren't screaming to go to war with Iraq like everybody else was. I was a child when it was happening, so, I wanted to go to war with Iraq. I really did. But I was a kid, so it's kind of weird to, somebody probably say, oh, he was for the war in Iraq. Oh. Well, he was 5 years old, so, that might have something to do with it. But I remember Ron Paul was not for that. I remember he was considered more of a down-the-middle candidate on the right wing, and I remember he said it will be used against American citizens. And here we fast forward 20 years. I remember he got shamed and ridiculed and laughed at for that comment. And 20 years later, he turned out to be right, and all the Republicans that sat on the stage and said that we need to go to war with Iraq, now they're all shamed for being a bunch of warmongers, interestingly enough how it works. And Ron Paul was right, because that's how you got January 6th and the gulags and all of that. So I see that it was a direct result of not following Benjamin Franklin that we got that result. And I hear things like George Washington in his farewell address where he said, "And I leave you with this, United States of America, do not create political parties, because if you do, it will only ever create division." Those words, and look it all up, Google it, do your research. Don't be brainwashed by the mainstream news media and by history classes. And sadly enough, yes, even history teachers that do not want you to find and see the truth because they would rather push or motivate their own propaganda network and want you to view the world the way that they see the world and not the way that it actually is. Or some of them might have righteous intent but are too cowardly to say the truth because they don't want to get fired by a state-controlled education system. Look it up yourself. Those are the direct words. And I know the reason why I have to tell you to look it up yourself is because I've met many people that when I tell them this quote, they actually look at me and say, "George Washington never said that." And they say it so confidently, like so much disbelief in their heart and their ears when they say, "George Washington never said." They're so convinced that I'm wrong, that I'm mistranslating or that I'm lying because, one, they have never been taught it, two, they've never countered the information in actual real world life, and three, it is so hard to believe that America would disobey its first ever founding father, the first president of the United States of America and the father of the Republic, that they can't believe that he would have said it, because if he did, obviously America would have listened to it, right? And here's the catcher. That's why I tell you to go research it. They did disobey him. They didn't listen. George Washington actually said in his farewell address when he was leaving office, when he was leaving president of the United States, he said when he was handing the country over to a new president and the future of America over to the people, he said, "I leave you with this one thing. Do not create political parties, for they will only ever bring division." That's what he exactly said, and I want you to look it up. And what did America do? It created political parties and then instated division. That's what it did. Now let's fast forward to where we are today. Would you say that it's because of political parties, because of the elephant in the room, the Republicans, and because of the ass, the jackass party, the Democrats, that maybe that's one of the core metrics to the reason why we have division in the country and in the nation and in the United States of America at this time? Because, I would say so. So once again, just like Benjamin Franklin, we see another cause for not listening to the founding fathers has gotten us into the mess that we're in. Let's use Thomas Jefferson as an example. Thomas Jefferson, did you know that Thomas Jefferson did not want there to be a national reserve? He did not want there to be a centralized banking system. He didn't want it. Thomas Jefferson said, he didn't want a Federal Reserve. Thomas Jefferson literally said, "Do not create a federal bank, because if you do, the bankers will take over all the property through inflation and eventually deflation. They will take over all the land, and then your sons and daughters will die as slaves on the continent that they conquered as free men." That is a direct quote from Thomas Jefferson, founding father. And what did America do? It disobeyed the founding father, and it created the Federal Reserve. And what happened? Well, we've seen what's happened since then. You get BlackRock, who has equity in over 90% of all U.S. businesses. You can thank Barack Obama for that, by the way. And you get Vanguard, who also does. And you get many other things, right? You get the Federal Reserve. You get people questioning whether or not there's gold inside of Fort Knox. You get the highest inflation rates that you've ever seen that skyrocket every single year. And you get this... You get the 2008 financial crisis. Let's rewind the clocks back to 2008. And this is why this has to do with Barack Obama and why I just said what I said. In 2008, if you can remember, do you remember that the whole crisis for the recession that was happening was because of property? It was because of land values, right? You remember the housing bubble, the housing crisis. It was all about foreclosures. Now, when that happened, what happened was that Thomas Jefferson's prophecy and warning came to pass that a bunch of centralized bankers would use and manipulate the system to steal all the property if you had a federal bank. And what is 2008 all about? The bankers manipulating the system to steal private property. That's why it's foreclosures and housing markets, because that's the biggest center of private property that there is for American citizens, the normal everyday person, that there is on the face of the planet, right? And you see all these foreclosures and all of this nonsense. And what happens in 2008 when Barack Obama comes out of nowhere? What did he do? He went and he got BlackRock. Just look the whole thing up, research it. He went and he talked to BlackRock and asked them. He cheapened the value of all the property in the United States and made a deal with BlackRock that they would buy all of it up. And then he said that that was because it would help America come out of the recession, blah, 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 blah. And he lied through his teeth because he's a puppet and a communist dictator. And the actual motivation was that BlackRock would be where we are today, which is where they own 90%. They have equity in 90% of U.S. businesses along with Vanguard. And by the way, let me tell you a secret. That's the reason why you're getting canceled. That's the reason why Nike won't stand up against wokeism. And that's the reason why the NFL has to say that they're against racism. And that's the reason why you get kicked off of every mainstream media. The reason why they all unanimously agree. The reason why every platform you go into, no matter what section it's in, wants to destroy and cancel you. And that's because they all have to do what Mama, BlackRock, Vanguard, New World Order, Federal Bank, and the National Security Agency tells them to do. Otherwise, they're going to meet the same exact fate. And you can thank all of that to Barack Hussein Obama. And it's not like the Bushes aren't without their mention, right? At all. Okay, so, but if America had followed Thomas Jefferson and never created a federal bank or a Federal Reserve, you would have never given the opportunity for Barack Obama to hand over all the land to BlackRock. You would have never gotten Bill Gates owning the majority of farmland in the United States of America, and the second biggest owner would be the Chinese Communist Party, right? You would have never gotten that if it wasn't for the Federal Reserve. You would have never gotten the inflation rates of Jimmy Carter after you took America off the gold standard, and then the ridiculous highest inflation rates of all time under the Jekyll and Clown, the Heckle and Jackal, who is not ever president, and nor have I ever muttered the words president before that fool's name. You would have never gotten that court jester and clown, and then you wouldn't have this mess that you have right now. All of that is completely avoided by just a few things. One, Thomas Jefferson, don't create a federal bank, and then the bankers won't be able to use inflation and deflation to manipulate the economy and steal all your land. Number two, George Washington, don't create political parties, and there won't be enough division for them to be able to divide America. Number three, Benjamin Franklin, do not create freedom for security, and then you don't get a Fourth Amendment that allows the NSA to spy on you, which gives them the ability to put people in the gulag on January 6th. My goodness. So what you see here It's because of that understanding, right? It's because of a super study. And by the way, you wouldn't be getting taxed into the ground either, and we wouldn't even be talking about taxes because there was no income tax. The taxes, when they rebelled, I know it's hard to believe. Think about this a long time ago, but did you ever hear that during the American Revolution it was called no taxation without representation, right? Do you ever remember the fact that it was all about taxes? Because I know today the propagandized education systems will have you think that there was that they were talking about taxes, but that's because the taxes were so horrible and they were so much worse than they are today, and that's why no. They were not horrible and worse than they are today. Our taxes today are 10 times isn't even real. It's worse than that. It's about 40 to 100 times worse, actual numbers, worse than they were back then. Because when the founding fathers, as I'm sure you remember, were throwing tea into the Boston Tea Harbor because of taxes, they were protesting the fact that taxes were like 3%, 2%, 1%. Some people in the tax wagon today are on 40%, which is why I said 40 times worse than they are back then. And people like Bernie Sanders want 100% sales tax. So that's why I said 40 to 100 times worse, because it was 1% back then. So they'll give you a little bit of truth. The founding fathers were rebelling against taxes, but then they mix it with a lie so that you stay a slave because they were so much worse back then than they are today. No, because they were so much worse today than they were back then, and we've gotten off basis. And if we were staying true to the founding fathers, we wouldn't even have these taxes. There would not even be an income tax. And many other taxes as well. We wouldn't have those either. At all. We just wouldn't. How does the government run if you don't have taxes? Well, there shouldn't be all these foreign aid and we could get into the details of that, but there's so much more there. We can unpack the whole details, bro. It's not just foreign aid. It's so many government programs. And when I say government programs, no, I'm not talking about starving people to death and taking away Medicare and Medicaid and taking away Social Security, okay? Although I do think that there's a better way to do those things. Not because I think that everybody that's on them is a lazy and we should just let the strong survive. I don't believe that at all. But I do believe that. So when I say federal programs, I just want you to understand something, okay? Okay. Now that we've went there, let me say this real quick. Okay, and I could expand on this a whole lot more. Food stamps, Medicare, Medicaid, Social Security, all the things that people think of when you say federal programs. If you actually look how much money is used in those federal programs, and this is going to make a lot of conservatives mad. This is going to make a lot of Republicans mad when I say this. And the reason why is because they never do the research. They never look at the actual numbers. They're just throwing out some blanket argument that they always pick up, and they don't realize that is the reason why people vote Democrat, because you sound like a completely stuck-up, self-righteous Pharisee who has their head up their backside when you say things like that, right? And when you actually look at the numbers, all of those programs make up for the smallest amount of government spending in the country. They make up for the tiniest amount. The smallest amount. The amount of money that we send in federal aid is multiple times higher than the amount of money we spend on those programs every single year. Multiples times higher. And that's just one example. Not just federal aid. Everything that we spend money on far outweighs the amount of money on federal programs. That's when you look at it from an actual, true, real mathematical perspective that people never want to do. So when I say federal programs, I'm not necessarily talking about those. I'm talking about federal aid, and I'm talking about all the money that we give to the CIA and the NSA and the FBI that's blatantly illegally used and abused, and the billions of dollars that disappears from the Pentagon. And then they say, we don't know where it went. All the money that disappeared from the Pentagon on September 10th, 2001, right before 9/11. Is that a coincidence? No, I don't think it is. Okay, I used to think that there's nothing there, but now that I look at it and I'm older and I do more research, okay, And I realize that that's true. That's not some sort of accusation. You can Google it. If you just go on there and say September 10th, 2001 newspaper headlines, you're going to see headlines that were posted on the internet back then, and the timestamp is there and everything. It says, billions of dollars disappear from the Pentagon, and everybody's talking about it. It's the number one news story in the world. And literally, when they're about to do the press release, 9/11, boom, oh no, everything happens. Nobody look at the Pentagon anymore. And interestingly enough, the Pentagon is one of the buildings that was struck in the exact place where all the documents were, where they put all the money. Where all the documents for that money you would have found from the day before were destroyed by that plane. What are the odds? That's all a fact. That's not a conspiracy. People are going to get mad at that. It's just conspiracy theories. But it's a fact. All it takes is 10 minutes. Just look at headlines from September 10, 2001 and see the billions. Do the research. You recall the Pentagon was struck, right? Go and research what part of the Pentagon was struck, and you will find out it is an actual fact. And you can lay it up to coincidence. You know, if you don't want to believe in conspiracies and you want to call it this major coincidence, you can if you want to. But the fact that can't be denied is that the papers that were where the papers were held in the Pentagon that had all the information for that specific study, they were the ones that were hit by the plane and burned up, and now we don't know where they are. And that's a fact. That part cannot be debated. It's been historically proven. Okay? Now, where the only part where you can try to debate is where you try to say or think that was a conspiracy, or you are like, or you say that's a coincidence, or you're like, maybe they did it on purpose because they didn't want anybody to find that money, right? And you're not saying the whole thing. You know, there's something there. Whether it is or not, I don't know. You know, I just don't know. But I know that it's not normal, okay? I know it's not normal. That's what I do know. I know that it's not normal. Do I think Muslims had to do with it? Yeah, I do. But I also think, you know, there's this idea where the conspiracy has to be all the way one way or all the way the other. Meaning, all the way one way, like it's 100% government and there were never any Muslims and da-da-da-da-da-da. I don't believe that. Or 100% the other way, there was no government involvement or allowance at all whatsoever, and it's all completely a coincidence. And I'm not necessarily sure I believe that. But you know, you act like there can't be this mixture. There can't be like maybe 80% Muslim, 20% government. Or like 70% Muslim, 30% government, 20% government allowing it, and 10% also making sure it got to the Pentagon so we wouldn't look at the papers. You know, and or whatever it is. I'm not saying specifically that's what it is, but I am saying that you act like it can't be any of these. Or 40-60, or 50-50, or 70-30 the other direction. You know, there's a possibility that gives a very good example to get in there. I mean, there's a huge motivation for going in there and doing that, right? Now, with that being said, and I'm not saying I subscribe to any of these theories. I'm an investigator, okay? I go and I search out and I investigate and I look at everything. And when I do that, looking at that, it seems very suspicious, and I'm not so sure that I believe it, okay? Now, with that being said, back on track, that creates... Where was I going before I got on 9/11? That's because I'm bringing it all the way back, focused to the original idea, right? That 9/11 creates the Patriot Act, which causes them, they call it the Patriot Act, has nothing to do with patriotism. Patriot Act has nothing to do with patriotism at all whatsoever. Go read the act. They do that all the time. Anytime they want you to pass a bill and not read it, they give it a name that's the polar opposite to what it actually is. Okay. So before I get there, government programs, the billions of dollars that went missing from the Pentagon far outweighs any amount of money you're spending on food stamps and welfare and all these kinds of things. With that being said, that does not mean, see, because I'm somewhere down the middle, can't define me, I know it sucks so bad. A lot of conservatives and Republicans, voters I mean, they won't like what I just said because they're under this whole false narrative of, the argument for the right wing has always been to just let the poor starve to death and everybody should build them up selves by their bootstraps. We just don't want to call it that because that makes us look bad. So we say things like, earn your own way, and all this other BS, okay? I make the Republicans mad about that because they think that means that I'm a far left Democratic Nazi, which I am not. At all. But they hear one thing and then they go, blah, 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 far left Democratic Nazi. And that's because they don't understand that I'm above that way of thinking from the left and the right wing. I am under the understanding that out of all government programs, welfare costs the least amount of money, which makes me hard to believe. It makes the argument very hard to believe that the reason I want to get rid of welfare is to save money. No, if you wanted to save money, you would stop the Pentagon from stealing billions of US dollars. You would abolish the IRS and all the money we spend there. You would get rid of all the extra government funding that we give to the FBI, the CIA, the NSA, and a dozen other security agencies you've never heard of that use all the money to abuse their power. You would stop funding foreign aid is the biggest one. You know how much money we would save if we cut 99% of foreign aid? You wouldn't create $2 trillion COVID bills and all this other kind of stuff. Oh, and by the way, in the $2 trillion COVID bills, only 300 million of that 2 trillion went to normal everyday people for stimulus checks. Like, the stimulus checks has caused inflation. No, they don't. No, they don't. That's a lie. They don't cause inflation. Oh, yeah, they do. If it wasn't for the stimulus checks, we wouldn't have inflation. No, that's a lie. That's what the Mitch McConnells and the Mitt Romneys say of the world. That's a lie. The truth is, it's what the hardcore GOP says, because they're pompous and they're a bunch of clowns and fools, okay? The truth is, Donald Trump would never say that. That's why he signed off on it, okay? The truth is, 300 million of that went to stimulus checks, meaning this. And by the way, the majority of that $2 trillion COVID bills, those $2 trillion COVID bills went to, one, foreign aid, and two, way more foreign aid than the stimulus checks, and two, a lot of it went to climate change. Like 70% of it. It should have been called the climate change bill, but it was called the COVID bill. 300 million went to stimulus checks. So by the way, what I'm saying is I could have cut the bill in half, right? From 2 trillion to 1 trillion and then tripled the amount that you were given as stimulus checks from 1,200 to 3,600. I could have given every American in the country $3,600 and cut the bill in half. I could have saved money by tripling stimulus checks. Because that's how much government fluff was in the $2 trillion COVID bills. That's how much crap was involved in it, okay? And that's the same for every single government program you ever look at. You people that love Elon and you love Doge and the Department of Government Efficiency. Come on now, you know what I'm saying? It's the whole reason it was a thing. And I like Doge. And I like Elon. I thought it was a good idea. And I think we should have done a lot more there. And I'm kind of disappointed in the fact that it's not really going like the way it was. I don't like that. I love Trump wholeheartedly 100%. I just don't like that. I wish that we did something there and we should bring it back. And I think in the future, we're going to find a way to do that because we got to bring it back, okay? Now, with that being said, that's why I'm not talking about welfare. Do you understand when I say government programs? I'm not saying... Now, listen to me here, right? So now I just pissed all the Republicans and the conservatives off with that talking point. So now let me go ahead and piss off the Democrats and the liberals. I'm not saying that there isn't a lot of fraud involved in all the welfare programs, because there is. Doge proved all of that, right? There's crazy, ridiculous amounts of frauds with welfare and food stamps and Social Security and so on and so forth, blah, 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 blah. I 100% think that we should cut out all fraud from all welfare programs. Absolutely. I also believe that if you're trying to you're trying to save money, and that's the real reason why you're doing it, and not just because I hate the poor and they should, it's not fair. Which is weird. That's a weird way to be. That's a weird, strange heart, intent, and motive. I don't like it. It's very weird. I don't like it. But if you are actually trying to get rid of government waste, I say okay, hold on a minute. Let's just take the welfare and all of that stuff that actually affects normal everyday citizens. Let's take that and put that over here for a minute and don't even look at it. And now let's look at foreign aid, corruption, insider trading, all the money that goes to the intelligence agencies, so on and so forth. And we'll cut all of this crap first, which, by the way, I would say you could probably get rid of at least half of all government funding right off the bat just from doing that. Just from looking at it, not even deep diving it, just from staring at it, you could get rid of half of all government funding. Then when you deep dive, that's probably more like 75%. Then, after we do that, take care of the real, actual corruption, then we can go over here and look at welfare and deal with that. And I do believe in getting rid of all the fraud from welfare. And I do believe, I'm not a big, giant fan of welfare for the sake that, I believe, not because I am unempathetic to the people on it, but because I'm so empathetic to the people on it, I do believe that it's the closest thing to communism in the United States of America that you will ever see. I am a firm believer of that because if you ever look at anybody that's on any of those programs, they treat these people horribly. The government does. The people that work there treat these people like they're dogs, like they're idiots, like they're fools, like they're kindergartners. The amount of regulations and rules they have for like HUD housing is 10 times higher than anything you would see for like a public property or like a traditional, rented out property. And that is an abomination. It should be thrown away with. And people will be like, well, yeah, blah, 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 blah. The reason why people say, well, yeah, is because they've never seen how those people live. If you ever actually seen, which I have, the way that those people live, you would never think to yourself, oh, yeah, well, blah, blah, blah. You wouldn't, because I didn't grow up on HUD housing or any of that. I didn't grow up like that. So I never saw what that world was really like. And I was one of those people. Maybe just you get rid of all of it. I really was. But then when I saw firsthand account the way that these people live, I was like, no, bro. No, this is evil. This is a violation of civil rights. This is a violation of human rights. So I'm not against those people because I really do believe that the welfare program actually creates slaves to the government. This is not an insult to the people that are on them, right? So you have to be very clear about the way that you say this because this could be misconstrued in any direction this way or that way, right? Because you're going to find your hardcore GOPs that hate those people. And then you're going to find your hardcore manipulative Democrats that are going to say, the only reason you say that is because you hate those people, right? No, both of those people are trash. You have to get rid of both, okay? Because I love those people, I am a firm believer that perpetuates communistic slavery. In fact, I know that it does. Because what you notice with those programs is that they never provide a pathway out. They never attempt to give the person a pathway out. None of those places say, oh yeah, by the way, here's a pathway to developing a skill or a trade, or here's a pathway to going to your local community college so that you can work your way out of the problem. They never do that. It never happens. It's always, oh, you make too much money? Well, now we'll charge you the same rent that we charge you if you were living in a privatized place. The only difference is we still keep we still violate your civil rights, and we just make it harder for you to get enough money to get a down payment on a place that's outside of HUD housing, right? It's like they don't want you to leave HUD housing. It's like they want you to stay there so that they can create government slaves. And then you have these people that are there their whole lives, and their children are there, and their children's children, and people are like, oh, they're just abusing the system. No, my friend, I am telling you right now, they are not abusing the system, okay? What's happening is that the government is intentionally making it hard and difficult for them to get out of it because they want there to be people dependent on it and government slaves. And really, that goes into the reason I was a socialist but became a capitalist, the reason I left the Democratic Party, similar to Candace Owens, right? Where Candace Owens was explaining the Democrats want the black community to stay dependent on the Democratic Party because no one will vote for them if they don't exist. That's what I'm telling you. The exact same thing, except for people on welfare. Of everyone, for poor people. For people that are on the lower class that are trying to work their ways out of poverty. Those people, they want them to the same exact thing. And this is the reason why I was such a big Candace Owens supporter. Because when she talked, I understood exactly what she was saying. I'm like, I hear you 100%. I was raised a Democrat. I know that world. And I think the exact same thing. Not just about the black community, but about every single graphic of people that they say that they represent, right? Welfare and the poor of all colors and nations and nationalities and creeds, because I don't know if you know this or not, all those people out there saying that white people are privileged and that it's just the poor blacks versus everybody else and the poor minority versus everybody else. Everybody that's saying that has probably never really stepped foot inside of a ghetto or inside of anywhere that's low-income housing, because I promise you, as all the blacks and Hispanics and whites and everybody else that's poor understands and will tell you, that when you're inside low-income housing, there's everybody there. The place is as diverse as you could possibly get. You got poor whites, poor blacks, poor Hispanics, poor Asians, poor everything. There's poor everything. Poor men, poor women, poor everything. And that's completely, blatantly, stupidly, dumbly obvious, which is why I don't even give it attention. It is so annoying that people act like that isn't a thing. So, we fight for the truly underprivileged people of all colors, nations, rationality, and creeds. Because guess what? Unlike the far left Democrats and BLM, and unlike the hardcore GOP, we're not racist. We fight for all of those people. Every single last one of them. Because we care. Because we don't discriminate whether or not somebody's white if they're poor or not. And we don't discriminate about whether somebody's black if they're poor or not. Like, come on, bro. Like, it's almost asinine to have these ideas, right? And so the thing is, I believe that the welfare world is perpetuating underprivilegedness, right? They're the reason it's a thing. Because the Democrat Party, just like Candace Owens said with the black community, is the same exact way to the poor people as well. We will save you. We will help you. How dare they want to get rid of HUD housing, and they want to get rid of food stamps, and they want to get rid of all of these programs? It's because they hate you. They want you to die. Now, like I said, there are people in that world that do. There are. Those are your Mitt Romneys, your Mitch McConnells, your hardcore GOPs. Got to get rid of them. But those people that are whispering that they are in your ear, they want to kill you too. They're friends with those people. Two sides to the same coin. They both want to destroy you simultaneously, and they work together to do it, and they come up with these narratives so they can ping pong back and forth power to each other. That's the Democrat and the Republican, traditionally. And they take advantage of good Democrats, like John F. Kennedy, and say, we're coming from his place. And good Republicans, like Donald Trump, and say, well, we're the party of MAGA and the Patriots. Yeah. And all of it is a lie. You have to call it for what it is. Right down the middle. And I call it like I see it. And my glasses on. But most of y'all don't get the picture unless the flesh is on. Satisfied with nothing. You don't know the half of it. Young money, cash money. I tell the truth, but I guess that's a foreign language to y'all. Exactly right. I speak the truth, but I guess that's a foreign language to y'all. And I call it like I see it. And my glasses on. And so, the truth is that welfare perpetuates slavery. Absolutely. It is the closest thing to communism you will ever see on this planet. When you look at the people that live in HUD housing, the way that these people that work there treat these people, like they act like they're stupid. And they come into their place whenever they want to. Horror stories. Terrible horror stories. I hear stories from people all the time. These people walking in there when the office hours aren't even existent, and they're walking in there while they're in the shower. They knock on the door and they tell them, "I'm in the shower." They scream and they don't care. They come in anyways. "Oh, I didn't hear you. I'm so sorry." And then they just keep doing what they're doing. They don't leave. Like, what is that? Women in the shower. Like, that's very strange. Okay? I hear it all the time. All the time. And don't pretend like you don't know, because you know. I hear it all the time. And so I'm not a big fan of welfare because I think it perpetuates communism and government control, and it creates generational slavery. 100%. I do actually think and believe that that's the intent of it. I do believe that Democrats do that on purpose because they wouldn't have any voters if they didn't. And so I am not for government programs, right? Because now that I said everything that I said about when I'm talking about cutting government spending, that I'm not specifically talking about welfare, then all the Republicans and the conservatives that have been brainwashed got pissed off at me because they've been brainwashed to hate the lower class so that they'll never focus on the politicians. And then I pissed off all the Democrats when I just exposed them for all their lies and metrics and to help all those people on welfare understand, to deliver them from the victim mentality and bring them into the victor mentality, just like I said, just like Candace Owens in the black community, same exact thing. Bring them from the victim mentality to the victor mentality. Don't give a man a fish, but teach him how to fish, and that will save his life. And help those people understand, and to look at the, and instead of them being brainwashed to hate the rich or the middle class, to realize that it's the politicians behind them speaking in the back of their head telling them, "We're going to come save you." That's their enemy, right? Because really, it's a class war. And really, although there are perpetuates in that class war, that's a real thing. And there's evil people involved in that have to be dealt with. The biggest fraud is that the politicians, Democrats and hardcore GOP, are the substantiators of that class war on purpose, because most of them are in it. You know, they're all rich if you don't notice, and they want to keep it as lower class, blame them, middle upper class, blame them, so that neither one of you blame us and you guys don't get rid of this whole problem, right? And that's what it actually is. So when I say cut government programs, just to wrap that whole thing up, I mean specifically, first and foremost, foreign aid, CIA, and all these kinds of things that we don't need. Abolish the IRS. Then you look into government programs like welfare. It cut out all fraud first, which helps the people that are on it more than it hurts them. It would never hurt them. It helps them. Then look into welfare and find a way to reform it, not to take it away and rip out the rug up from underneath people, because this is the way they've always done things and they would not know how to do anything else, because they've been perpetuated a government slave legacy throughout generations because of the Democratic Party, so on and so forth. But generate the funding in a way, conform the funding in a way where it becomes pathways out instead of keeping you in. The Democrat Party would hate that because they lose all their voters. The people that work at HUD housing in those places would hate that because they're all a bunch of slimy, sick individuals, and they don't want you to get out because then they don't have a job and they don't have any power anymore. Imagine being so small that you have to work at a HUD housing office for the rest of your life because you're so tiny that the only time you ever feel like you're in power is when you're making fun of elderly, sick, autistic, and mentally retarded individuals. Imagine being that small, tiny, and sick. How pathetic is someone's life like that, right? And also, poor people that may not fit into any of those qualities, but those people are there too, and they need help, okay? Now, the thing is, they don't want you to get out either. So we perpetuate government spending involved in welfare to create, and, there's people that haven't graduated and they need a GED. I don't understand that. I graduated. I never understood that way. But I'm not hating or, judging people that have, because I've seen people that quit high school and we were gone for like 15 years and they come back and not only do they get a GED, but they wind up getting like an MBA and then they wind up running like a multi-million-dollar business and you're like, I mean, come on now. Now that's a success story. That's a beautiful thing that needs to be celebrated. But pathways also for your local community college. Get people to go to college, okay? There's nothing wrong with college, okay? And I understand, the ideas of Turning Point USA and Charlie Kirk and it's all a scam and all this. And I understand that, and I agree with that. I do. Pretty heavily. But that doesn't mean that every single degree is useless, right? And I don't believe Charlie Kirk would ever perpetuate that either. In fact, actually, that's why he endorsed, which college was it? I can't remember, but there, Southern Hampshire, maybe, some college like that, which is the greatest college in America. And what he means by that is, we're not trying to tell you not to get a degree. We're trying to tell you that college has moved away from educating you in how to get a degree and use it to actually do what you want to do in life, and has immigrated to teaching you a bunch of socialistic, communistic scam artistry, and then make you believe that you're actually getting an education when you're getting an indoctrination. Exactly. So we're not, and not every degree is useless because you can use some. Business degree will never be useless. You'll always be able to use it. Okay, it's just a fact. In practicality standards, that is just a fact. Okay, there's nothing wrong with it. So get people to go to college to get a degree that actually helps them or gets them towards whatever goal they want to go to, right? If you want to be a doctor, you got to go to med school. You want to be a lawyer, you got to go to law school. You understand? Some things are not useless. Simultaneously, of course, we work the entire education system to make all degrees not useless like it used to be, like it's supposed to be, right? And not a communist scam, which is why we have like Christian universities or Prager universities, capitalistic universities, not communist universities, right? And also on top of that as well, maybe they don't want to go to college. And then that's an argument. They don't want to go to college. And really, that's just a way to easily get out of the conversation because you're judging an entire group of people because you don't know how they think, because you don't know nothing about them. And you're really kind of just trying to oppress them. But the ones that don't want to go to college, so you make programs that help people learn a trade or find a way to go to a trade school or entrepreneurship programs. There's a lot you could do there. But the money that's in welfare should be used to help people learn how to make a better way than instead of creating generational slaves. So I am not for welfare. I am against it. But I am not for completely defunding it and ripping it out from underneath people's feet. I'm for reworking it to turn it from a communistic, socialistic, generational slave camp perpetuator into actually teaching people how to get out of it and causing them to mentally be undependent on the government. Similar to like Ben Carson, right? Like Ben Carson's wonderful mother who turned a child into a brain surgeon with a library card. That's pretty incredible. Understanding the difference between victim and victor mentality, right? And God helps you get there, okay? That's what God does. He takes people from victim to victor, because at the end of the day, you are more than a conqueror through Christ Jesus, and you are a warrior. You're not trying to become one. You are one. But anything that helps people get from victim to victor mentality really is of God, because God doesn't want a bunch of losers. God created a bunch of winners, okay? It's not your destiny to be stuck in HUD housing for the next 100 years and everybody in your bloodline to be too, okay? It's your destiny for you to go and be great and awesome and wonderful, make it out of the mess, become the biggest thing on earth, and then go back and tell those people, here's how you get out of it. This is the right way to do it. And that's why people love hip-hop so much, because hip-hop kind of was exactly that, right? Now, I'm for reforming welfare to help the people in it out of empathy because I love them and I think they're worth more than what all of these pathetic perpetual slave drivers want them to be. Because really, the people in HUD housing are head and shoulders above the clowns that think they're running it. So, and also cut out welfare fraud and rework and all that. Okay, so I wasn't going to go into a big giant tangent about all that, but we tapped on the subject a little bit, and then I could see I was going to save that whole entire breakdown for like a whole nother episode or something, but we touched on it a little bit, and I was like, since we've touched on it, it's going to be confused if I don't say it exactly how I mean it, so I went in there and I had to break it all the way down. Okay. So, rework welfare, help people get out of it, don't rip it out from underneath them. In fact, actually, maybe I'm even for tripling the amount of money that we give to Social Security and unemployment and various other welfare programs as well while they're being trained to get out of it. I am for that because like I explained with the COVID bill, I look and I say, if I cut the government fluff out of that thing, I could triple it and it would still be cheaper. And that's why I'm also for getting rid of the fraud, because that loosens up more money, right? More cash flow. And also, but like I said, before you even look into all that, when I say get rid of government spending, I think it's really a problem that the first thing that Republicans think of when they hear that is automatically starve to death all the people on food stamps. Like, why is that the very first idea that goes through your mind when you see welfare, when you see that welfare costs a fraction of what you spend in foreign aid every year? It costs a fraction of the billions of dollars that disappear inside the Pentagon. It costs a fraction of the lobbying and insider trading and all of that BlackRock Vanguard nonsense. It costs pennies on the dollar to all the government fluff you have in virtually every other single government program besides welfare. You know what I mean? So I think if you really want to save money, you start there. Attack the corruption and the elites first. And then we'll deal with all of that, right? That's what I think, that's what I feel, that's what I believe. As of right now. So, help the people that are in welfare get out of it because we love them. They're really a lot greater than they think that they are. And destroy all the people that are trying to oppress them, which also breaks the back of the Democratic Party and breaks the back of socialism and communism, quite frankly, because that's what they lean on to try and convince everybody that the capitalists are a bunch of bigots and, you shouldn't listen to them. You realize, right, that the reason why you have socialists and communists in this country that are doing it out of empathy, not out of malicious intent, but the empathetic ones, like myself once upon a time, that the reason why you give them fuel is because you say things like, pull yourself up by your bootstraps. All the people on welfare are evil people. Like, you realize that that's what gives them the ability to look at you and say, don't ever listen to the GOP Republicans. Trump just wants to kill all the poor and he wants to create the Hunger Games. You realize you're the one that gives them that fuel. And the way that you stop it is by actually looking at the people on it and quit blaming them for all your problems and realize that it's the politicians and the New World Order that is your problem, not your common fellow citizen, regardless of class or whatever else it may be, right? Now, with all of that being said, that brings us back to why I said we don't need taxes. Because when I say that the Founding Fathers had 1% tax, and I say we got to abolish all these taxes, and then the argument is, how are we going to pay for the government if we do that? I just gave you the answer for how we pay for all of that when we do all of that, okay? Now, that brings us back to get rid of all the taxes, be more like the Founding Fathers. That brings us back to, you thought I was going off on a tangent. You had no idea that the whole time I was bringing it all the way back full circle because I'm very aware of where my mind is all the time. So that takes us back to, we get rid of the taxes, takes us back to abolishing a lot of government funding, takes us all the way back to where we originally were, which is the argument between Charlie Kirk over here, right wing, and Russell Brand, and how both of them had the integrity, just a different worldview of how to get there. And why I was more like Russell Brand at one point in time, abolish the whole thing, rework it from the bottom up, to more like, now I agree more on Charlie Kirk's side of it, which is that already happened with the Founding Fathers, but it's completely because you disregarded and disagreed with them and did the opposite of what they said, and you refused to listen when Thomas Jefferson said, don't create a Federal Reserve, or George Washington said, don't create political parties, or Benjamin Franklin said, freedom over security, or you deserve neither. Because you didn't listen to that, they already started it from the bottom up. They created the closest thing to the greatest thing. They created the greatest thing that we've ever seen in the history of all of mankind, the greatest government ever, and the closest thing to perfection, the closest thing to heaven on this side of earth until we get to heaven. Not saying that it's impossible, but right now it's the greatest thing that we've seen on this side of heaven. And if you want to fix the system, you work it back down to the foundation of America and then rebuild the country based off of its original foundation. Exactly. And that's how you take care of that. And that's where Charlie Kirk was coming from, right? Charlie Kirk he had the same exact heart motivation as Russell Brand, but I think that we've already done step 1 through 5 in going somewhere and creating a fresh new thing from the bottom up. The Founding Fathers did that. Now, what we got to do is, the problem is that steps 6 through 100 since then have all went way off basis, and now the whole thing is shaky, and we got to rewind it from 100 back to step 6, and then continue go all the way back to where we started doing the opposite of what they said, and now start to rebuild the foundation from that place up. And really, I believe that that's what Donald Trump and Make America Great Again and all of that is all about. I believe wholeheartedly that that's where that's all about. I believe that that's Donald J. Trump's heart motivation for the United States of America as well. %100%. And that's why Donald Trump is like a second American Revolution. He is the second George Washington, right? For that reason right there. That's exactly what it is. So that brings me back to saying a couple things. Number one, which is, do I believe with the conspiracies of 9/11? Yeah, I sort of do. I don't have a perpetuated idea for which ones I think are true or are not. So does that make sense? So in other words, I don't know that I believe that jet fuel can't burn through steel. I do think it's possible to do that with a couple of planes, right? I don't know which ones are real or which ones are fake. I don't know, those are the typical conspiracy theories. I don't know that I subscribe to those, but what I do think, or the idea, and I definitely don't think that the Jews or Israel had to do with it, okay? So let's just get that out of the way. But I do think, and I do believe that Muslims had a lot to do with it. But what I don't think, when I say I don't prescribe, I don't know which ones I prescribe to, but what I do prescribe to is that I do believe that there's a lot more going on there that meets the eye. I do believe that the Pentagon and the government and people like that probably had some sort of intertwining with the entire thing. I just don't know how much, how far that goes, how deep it goes, and where the details of all that go. Exactly. But I think we will eventually, one day. I think it'll all come out eventually one day. And with that being said, that brings me back to the Patriot Act, which I almost kind of believe that the whole reason 9/11 even happened was just so that there could be a Patriot Act. They're like, well, it's for Iraq, and I don't know about all that. I think that it's possible that is a third party after effect of what helps maybe a new world order. But I almost wonder really if the actual motivation for it was to actually just to be able to create the Patriot Act. Which, let me tell you what the Patriot Act is too, because I already touched on the idea that they name bills differently than what they are to get people to agree to them. So when someone hears the Patriot Act, if they don't know what that is, especially nowadays, if I say, we're going to make this Patriot Act, everybody's like, whoa, yeah, whoa, yes, let's make the Patriot Act. In fact, I would say 70-90% of MAGA voters would say that that's a good idea. And that's not because they think that the actual bill itself is a good idea. It's because they hear the word Patriot Act and they automatically think that's got something to do with patriotism and being a patriot, which is why they named it the Patriot Act, so that you would think that. When you actually look at the Patriot Act, which was drafted up by the Republicans and George W. Bush, what it actually is the Patriot Act is the ability for the NSA, the CIA, the FBI, the government to not have to follow the Fourth Amendment. That's literally the words it uses. To not have to follow the Fourth Amendment if they think that you're connected to terrorism. So in other words, the Fourth Amendment says there's no unreasonable searches or seizures. Troops can't ask to live in your house. You don't have to give them a place to stay because that's their business and none of yours. You're a free American, so on and so forth. And also, as a metric of that, you don't have to let them into your house. You don't have to give them anything of that nature because you're an American and it's your right to say, no, I don't want you to live in my house. And this is my place. And you can't search me out because you don't have a warrant, right? That's the Fourth Amendment. Now, what the Patriot Act did was it said, well, how about we change the rules on that one to where if we think that you're connected to terrorism, that we can outrightly violate that and do unwarranted searches and seizures, meaning we can go through your house when you're not home without you ever knowing that we did, and we can search through everything that you own, and we could go through all your private data, your phone, and all of this. We can do all of that without your knowledge or consent, without you ever knowing if we say that you're connected to terrorism or that we think that you are. That's what the Patriot Act is. On the surface, a lot of people said, that sounds like a good idea because 9/11 just happened, but that's why the purpose of 9/11 was to do that, to get people in such a scared frenzy that they would disobey the founding father, Benjamin Franklin, and trade their freedom for security, and then that's where we are today. And then people say, well, duh, Josh, they already do all that anyways. Oh, yeah, but the reason why they do it, and the reason why you can't sue them, the reason why they're getting away with it, is because of the Patriot Act in 2001. And that's what Edward Snowden was all about. When he was talking about the NSA, that's what he was saying. He was saying, by the way, just to prove that Ron Paul and all the people that said that they would use the Patriot Act against American citizens, just to prove that that wasn't a conspiracy and it was actually the excuse for making it, here's what the NSA is doing. They're spying on everybody's phone data. And that's what Edward Snowden was all about. And now we're here. And Ron Paul was right because that's what they used to throw all the January 6ers into the gulag. They came there and said, well, you're suspected of terrorism. What they did and what people were trying to say, the problem with that is that who defines what terrorism is? Today it's the jihads. What is it tomorrow? Now we know that tomorrow it's MAGA patriots. So if you're connected to the MAGA patriot world, you're a terrorist, and therefore we could throw you all in prison. And that's what it was. And that's how they got their phone data that tracked them to say that they were present there at January 6th. And I had a couple of tweets that sort of went semi-viral back then where I said, oh, all of a sudden, when 2000 Mules came out, all of a sudden the geopolitical tracking data doesn't work anymore on cell phones. The GPS tracking data doesn't work. It only works when they're using it to determine whether or not you were 1,200 feet away from the Capitol building and in the Trump rally. It just doesn't seem to work when determining whether or not you were 1 foot away from the voting mail-in booths and the camera footage that shows you walking up to it and shows that you went to the places that were actually orchestrating real ballots and that you had multiple envelopes in your hand, like, no, but it's not capable of featuring that one at all. Exactly, of course, bro. Absolutely crazy. Then they went after the people that made that and tried to throw them in prison. Of course they did. Because of the Patriot Act. So that brings me back to saying that's why I agree more with Charlie Kirk now instead of like Russell Brand, like I originally did. Which is that I think Charlie's right. Steps 1 through 5 that Russell Brand thinks start from the bottom up have been perpetuated already by the Founding Fathers. But like Donald Trump, we just got to go back to and rework all this nonsense, meaning all the taxes that came in out of nowhere, the Patriot Act, so on and so forth. You know, all of these things, even maybe the federal bank. We got to rework all that back to where the original idea of the Founding Fathers was and build it from that foundation. And that's how you make America great again. That vision of democracy and we, the people, by the people, for the people, reigns and rules over the idea of whatever it has become since then. Now, that leads me back to, all the way back to the original idea at the very beginning of the episode where I said, if you disagree, then just come and talk about it because we won't silence anybody, because what I look for is the heart intent. It's the reason why I said whether they're far left or they're far right, actual far right, not conspiratorial claim to be far right, or far left, same exact form, same thing, then come on and speak, because I believe that the heart motivation is what really matters, because like Russell Brand says, far left than any government in existence, but his heart motivation is correct, which is why I was always a fan of him. And I said eventually that'll lead him to Jesus, because Jesus is the truth. And if you're really in it for the truth, he's the ultimate truth. And eventually that's where it will lead you to. And it did, like I said. Or like Charlie Kirk, who has the same motivation as Russell Brand, just a different idea of how to get there. And that's originally what left and right was back in like the 1960s and every year prior. Just has a different idea of how to get there. It just believes that it was already reworked from the bottom up and we just got to go back to the constitutional republic and solve it that way. Now, with that being said, well, Russell Brand is a good example because that's easy to say because he's already become a Christian. Well, see, no, that's not true because because you look at someone like Katt Williams, right? Katt Williams. I love Katt Williams. Katt Williams is one of the most real people on the face of this planet, bro. And here's my thing with Katt. I will tell you this. I was not a fan of Katt Williams at all by any metric of the spectrum at all in any way, shape, or form. I've never been a fan of Katt Williams growing up or like in recent years. Stretch. Or in years before that, you know, I've never been a fan of Katt, really. And I'll tell you why. I was never a fan of Katt Williams because I just felt like Katt, you know, I just wasn't a fan. You know, some things you like, some things you don't like. You know, I just wasn't a fan of him. I just thought that Katt was like, I just was not a big subscriber to his comedy. I felt like he was just kind of like, he was just overly raunchy. And that's the only reason why people laughed at it. And like, he was like, you know, just, that's just who he was. I just was not into the over raunchiness of Katt Williams' comedy. I just was not a fan. And I thought, and I would see him get these looks on his face sometimes, and I was like, man, this guy really thinks he is something, don't he? He thinks he is something, doesn't he? I would see this, I'm like, he really thinks he is something, don't he? And I was not a big fan of him. Now, I had never heard the man, Katt Williams, speak before I had ever seen that or felt that way. And that's why it's important to, listen to the person speak. Because I had never heard him speak. I was not a fan of him at all. And I thought that, this guy really thinks he is something. Like, he's over here trying to, like he thinks that, all these things. He thinks he's actually better than all the people that are listening to his comedy. And while I thought all these things about Katt Williams, then he does the interview, and I've thought that for years, literally decades. It's actually kind of similar to Donald Trump. Before Donald Trump ran for president, I was not a big fan of him either. I was in that whole metric of, oh yeah, Donald Trump. It's hard to believe now. It's almost impossible to believe now, seeing who I am and what I think and what I believe now. But at the time, I was like, oh my God, Donald Trump. Basically what everybody that hates Donald Trump sounds like. I was like, oh yeah, he just wants this, that, and the other thing. I'm totally different than that now. I am so far aligned with Donald Trump that you would not believe it under the sun. Maybe I am more aligned, and actually I am more aligned to Donald Trump than any president in the history of the country since I've been alive. But maybe I'm actually more aligned to Donald Trump than like 90 to 99% of all the people walking the face of the earth right now. I absolutely love Donald Trump with everything inside of me. And everything in social media over the last 10 years will only ever confirm that fact. It's so easy that anybody could look at any of my social media from any platform in the last decade, and they will not hear one thing that is like anti-Trump. Just pro-Trump everything. And I've explained that before. Does that mean that I agree with every single detail? It doesn't matter, because people are human beings. Of course, you'd be like, well, I don't, there's this thing and this thing, but like these are minor issues. Compared to the real actual thing, 99% agree. I'm in as a direct alignment with Donald Trump as like Carrie Lake is, right? And that's how I feel about Carrie Lake too. I love Carrie Lake, absolutely love her actually. 99% agreement. And she liked my tweet on Twitter, man. It's so cool. I still can't get over the fact, can't believe that she actually saw this. Really cool. But anyways, so I was like that with Katt Williams. I could not stand Katt Williams over decades. Then I saw the interview that comes out where he breaks the internet with his interview, right? And as he breaks the internet with his interview, I go and I watch it, and I get to see the real Katt Williams speak. The actual authentic person, not the comedian Katt Williams, not the person who everybody knows on the forefront as a comedian, not the raunchy comedic addresses of Katt Williams, but the actual authentic person and what he thinks himself as a human being. And I found that Katt Williams is one of the realest, most authentic, most transparent people on the face of the planet that I have seen up until this point thus far. I absolutely love Katt Williams. When I got to see who Katt really was, it completely changed my mind about him. Completely changed my entire way of thinking about him. And then I started to think, you know what? Maybe it's not that Katt Williams is like arrogant or prideful or full of himself, like towards all of his viewers or your normal everyday people watching at home. Now I understand the reason why Katt Williams acts that way, and it's the same thing that I think about Donald Trump. The reason why he acts that way is because he's acting that way not to your normal everyday person or viewer at home, but specifically towards the people that are in that industry that are all fake and fraudulent and elites and actually are that way towards your normal everyday people at home. Does that make sense? So like the people in the political industry and the cultural industry, and I'm sure in comedy as well, and I'm sure that goes in every single aspect of the thing, whether it be actors or dancers or singers or whatever it is, that a lot of the people in that industry absolutely despise your normal everyday person at home. They really are arrogant and prideful and think that they're better than you and everybody else. They really do believe that. And they're so aware of the fact that they are such a small minority compared to the group of people at home that are watching them, that they put on a fraudulent fake mask and a laughing, smiling face, and they hide the fact that they're that way because they know that it's all about public image. Because if there's anything any deceiver, any con artist, any cult leader, any Jim Jones or Adolf Hitler type knows, any used car salesman knows, is that it's all about public perception. If the people don't suspect that you're a bad guy, then it doesn't matter if you are or not, because they'll never be able to stop you, right? They're very aware of that. Every con is. Does that mean that everybody that acts that way is that way? No, because some people just have different personalities, obviously. But there's a lot of people that do act that way, and cons always have that same personality as well, too. What they call charisma. There are non-con artist people that have charisma because they're born with it, and then there's con artists that are nothing but charisma, smoke and mirrors, and it's all fake smiles and everything. You know what I mean? So I would say that a large majority of the people in all of those industries is that way. They're a con. And that's why they don't say what they really think, because they're hiding behind lies so that they could win votes. Now, when you look at somebody like Donald Trump, like Katt Williams, those people are not that way. And because they're not that way, they are very brash, very blunt, very outspoken, very in your face about it, because they're not trying to hide what they actually think. They're not trying to put on a smile or a cult leader, used car salesman, washed up attitude to try and convince you that they believe something that they don't. They're letting you know what they actually think. And as a result of that, I would imagine that when you are that real, when your realness level is that high, and you're surrounded by people that you know are not authentic and not the same way, I subscribe to the idea that that would probably rub you the wrong way about those people, and you probably would not get along with them, and you would constantly be getting in back and forth beefs and battles with these people. Now, as a result of that, that explains to me why you would have a all up in your face about it, almost kind of an arrogant attitude, because you got to be arrogant on your enemies, because you're the head and they're the tail, and I'm the man, I'm the winner, and you're the hater, and we're going to make sure that everybody knows it too, right? And that's what it really is, because it's true. Duh. And as a result of that, you're like a bull in a china shop, or you're like a sledgehammer coming through and smacking all of these fools down, all these haters down, all these false elites that think they're elite. They really think they are something, and they're not. And so you develop this, this laughing at them, ha, 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 in your face attitude. And then what happens is that gets mistaken by people that are watching at home as they're doing that to me, instead of they're doing that to the guy that's sitting right next to them that they know is full of crap, right? And then that makes people think, oh, Donald Trump is so arrogant, or oh, Katt Williams is so arrogant, right? Because that's what I used to think, for sure. Does that mean they shouldn't? No. They should absolutely be that way. That is the most righteous way for them to be, right? It's just that the con artists in the industry try to change the focus of that camera because that's the only thing they're good at. The only thing that they have the possibility and capability of doing is switching the focus of a camera to make things look like one way when they're really another, right? And so that's how I was with Katt Williams. But then when I heard Katt Williams speak, and I realized how real that Katt was, and I realized how truthful Katt was, and how transparent and full of integrity that Katt was, I was like, you know what? No, man, I love Katt Williams. And I actually feel bad about the fact that I hated him for all these years, but I didn't hate him because of who he was. Right? Does that make sense? That's an interesting thought. I didn't hate him because of who he was. I hated him because of the projected image I had of him that was not who he really was. And when I have that idea of a person in my head, I hate that person. If that was the real him, I'd still hate him. I didn't change my opinions about those people. What I changed my opinion about, or the revelation that I received, was that that person, the real Katt Williams, is not the projected image I had of him in my mind. The same thing that I did with Donald Trump, and the reason why I like Donald Trump now. Now I see the real Katt Williams, the real Donald Trump, and that person who I would have always loved had I known they were that person. Now that I do, because of that revelation, I love those people, and I'm aware of the fact I've always loved these people. I just had no idea who they were, right? And Katt Williams, one of the realest, rawest people on the planet. This is another thing with Katt Williams, okay? And if you haven't seen that interview yet, you really need to. That was one of the most fantastical interviews by any celebrity on the face of the planet in, maybe ever, really. And Katt Williams rips into so many people in the industry, into the comedic industry, people stealing his jokes, all sorts of stuff. But there's no limit to where Katt Williams will go. And that's what I love about Katt Williams. That's the reason why the interview went mega viral. That's the reason everybody paid attention to it. It broke the internet, because they realized Katt Williams truly just does not care. He will go into and rip after anybody, no matter who it is. And that's the way you should be. He has no fear. And I love that. He goes into everything. He talks about Jussie Smollett. He talks about T.D. Jakes. He talks about everyone and anything you could possibly think of. And he talks about the Illuminati. He's very outspokenly frank about, oh yeah, there is an Illuminati and it does exist and they tried to recruit me, but I said no because I'm not involved in all of that. Because I believe in God, and God is anti-Illuminati and Illuminati is anti-God, and I'm not going with the Illuminati. Yeah, I respect that, yeah. And a lot of people probably watch that and say, there's no way that's true. And I'm like, bro, you know how I know it's true? If you listen, if that's the only clip you saw, and you're not convinced about whether or not what he said is true about him and Ludacris and the 20 movies and all that, if you're not convinced that that's true, it's because you didn't watch the hour and a half before he said it, right? If you watch the hour and a half and you become very well aware of the fact that Katt Williams is really just so real that he doesn't care what anybody thinks, it's really hard to believe that for just a 15-second slit there, he decided to just completely out of the blue make everything up, and it came out of absolutely nowhere, right? So I love Katt. Now, the reason I'm talking about Katt, using Katt as an example, this is the Truth Rebellion. All we talk about is truth. And Katt's only talking about truth, right? An example of like Russell Brand, right? So, an example that I don't have to agree with somebody's views to notice that they're on the right side of things, right? The reason why I said I let anybody talk, because I look for heart motivation as opposed to ideological alignment, right? Because, and the reason why I let anybody onto the show is because people that have completely different views, but their heart motivation is correct, those people will always be allowed to speak, because I believe that if your heart motivation is correct, once you follow the breadcrumbs long enough, you will wind up at the right result, because what you truly desire in life over and above all things is the truth and righteousness and justice, and not some perceived narrative, right? So, And I think that what would actually bring unity, right, from people with different ideological viewpoints is the knowledge that motivationally they're on the same side, right? So people that have different views, whatever you want to call them, put them in any kind of spectrum you think of, but if the heart motive is motivationally correct, they're actually united in spirit and truth and heart. They just have a different idea of how to get there. And that's what we kind of universally always agreed upon in the United States back in the 1960s between Republicans and Democrats. We never doubted the heart motive of the other individual. We just doubted that we doubted their interpretation of how to get to that result. And now we doubt the heart motivations of the other side, which is understandable because there are a lot of people on the forefront that have come out that have horrific heart motivations. They're like the modern day Adolf Hitlers, and we have to destroy them. Okay? But the point is, and that's on the left wing, right? That's on the left wing. Your Hillary Clintons and your Barack Obamas, who I think is maybe one of the most evil men on the face of the planet. And it's on the right wing as well, right? Your Mitt Romneys and your Mitch McConnells and possibly even like maybe your George Bushes, It's very possible. And, I'm not so sure I don't believe that. And so on and so forth. So those people have risen up, and now to expose them, or if you want to bring true unity, what it has to be is you have to look at the heart motivations. So there's people on the left and the right that have a different heart motivation, that really want to actually make things better. That's where the real division comes from, between malicious intent and heart motivation, right? And so that's why I think like people like Bill Maher on the left wing, the heart motivation is a lot more correct to actually making things better. I don't believe that Bill Maher has this weird malicious ill intent and he wants to destroy everybody. I don't believe that, which is the reason why he's so outspoken about how crazy the far left has gotten, and he's in such alignment with Israel and the Jews, and he's Jewish himself. And the same thing is true of people on the right wing, even if they don't get along with Bill Maher and so on and so forth. Now, I use Russell Brand as an example, and how I knew eventually if someone wants the truth that bad, they'll always come to Christ. And then he did. Proof. And Charlie Kirk as an example, who both wanted the same motivation, which is the greatest country and system that you could ever possibly have on the planet, but just different ideas of how you get there. And so I use Katt Williams as an example, right? I don't necessarily agree with Katt Williams on every single issue. In fact, there's a lot of things I probably don't agree with Katt Williams, politically, ideologically, right? Because Katt Williams doesn't like Donald Trump. I love Donald Trump. I'm a Trump loyalist. And Katt Williams is for, maybe even uses the word woke, but I don't use the word woke because I don't believe in all that. But also, Katt Williams' version of that is totally different than like this modern version of what it is, right? But the heart motivation of Katt Williams is correct. Katt Williams is realness, truth, righteousness, and justice, and wants to see realness, truth, righteousness, and justice hit the forefront. That's all that matters to me. Because that person, regardless of who they are, if they have that heart motivation, then we are on the same side. Do you understand? If you have that heart motivation, then you and me, we're on the same side. And even if we think that there's a different way to get there ideologically, the truth of the matter is that there is one way to get there. And maybe you haven't discovered it yet. And also maybe I don't have the complete full image of exactly how to perpetuate that as well. I could be 90% correct, 10% wrong, or, whatever, vice versa, with anybody, and they the same. But that's not what matters. If we both have the heart motivation for making that world a reality, as long as we continue to follow that heart motivation, and maybe mine goes this way and someone else's goes a different direction, eventually we will all wind up at the same point if we seek that truth out no matter what, because the truth is always the truth and will always be the truth, and there's only one truth, and if you're really looking for it, you will always come to it. You will always find it. It will always be the glaring example that proves everything else wrong. And we'll always wind up in the same place. So that's why I don't hate people that's why I just because of someone's ideological preference, I don't automatically dictate them as being like a wicked or evil person or throw them off in a bench somewhere. Because although I know that I'm 90% closer to the truth on certain subjects than like Katt Williams is on certain subjects. And I mean, those are very tiny, like 1% of the things we disagree on, right? I don't even pay attention to them because it's not even a thing. And I'm sure that people probably think that about me as well, right? But, the thing is, though, but the heart motivation for Katt Williams, like Russell Brand, like Joe Rogan, like so many others, is correct. And as long as that's correct, when it all comes down to the forefront, that person will always wind up on the right side of the truth, whatever that truth is, and wherever that truth may lead them. Even if they totally disagree with it now, if they have all information, all lies removed, and all they see is truth, they're going to pick the right side every single time. Because I'm the same way, right? Because I was like more aligned perpetually to socialism and communism. Maybe not, I wouldn't use the words communism, but socialism and communism are kind of the same thing. I really kind of sort of was in the world of socialism. But because my heart motivation was always righteousness, truth, and justice, and empathy, it led me to where I am now, which is a capitalist. Because the heart motivation wasn't incorrect, but the lack of understanding of how socialism becomes communism always in its tyranny, and how the people that perpetuate socialism and communism are like wolves in sheep's clothing and are actually the most despicable people because they manipulate the poor and the people that they claim that they're trying to help. And that the way that you get to the actual answer for how to do that is capitalism. It's because my heart motivation was correct that God was able to mold me and change my mind and viewpoint. Because when God looked at me, he didn't say, oh, well, he's a socialist, so he's Joseph Stalin and Karl Marx. No, what he saw was, oh, well, he really is empathetic and cares about human rights and actually cares about the real truth and destroying tyranny and the New World Order. So he's just got a few things in there that he is under the illusion of that he thinks are right and true and are not. And that's the only reason why he aligns himself with them. And if I reveal to him that these are lies and that there's an actual truth and show him what it is, then he'll align himself with that one. And then did that through capitalism and all sorts of things. That's how I wound up liking Donald Trump. That's how I wound up liking Katt Williams. That's how Russell Brand wound up a Christian. Because of those exact things, right? And that's what I'm saying about people, anybody in general, people like Katt Williams. The heart motivation, which I can sense, is correct. Meaning that if there's anything that Katt Williams is ideologically wrong on, that I know that he's wrong on, that the only reason why he's wrong on them is because he believes that he's right on them, not because he has some kind of malicious ill intent. That's all that matters. Because that person, whenever they find what is the actual truth, they will abandon any ideology that is out of alignment with actual pure truth, which is what I'm trying to say. That's the reason why I let anybody and everybody talk, because what I'm looking for when I talk to people is their heart, intent, and motivation. I'm trying to decipher and discern what this person thinks, why they think it, and what their actual motivation for it is, so that I can decipher, is this person on the right side or the wrong side? Not ideologically, not left or right, not all these things, but morally truth or morally perpetuating a false narrative lie. And then when I determine that, I can determine whether or not this person is on my side when it comes to the revolution and the rebellion for truth and actually letting the truth be heard and for everybody to know what it is. If they're pro-New World Order or anti-New World Order, you understand what I'm saying. So that's why I let everybody speak, because I think that the only way you're going to bring unity is when all heart motives are brought to the front. When all heart motives are brought to the front, people can discern who's a good guy, who's a bad guy, and that brings actual unity, because then people will say, it doesn't really matter that we have these certain ideological differences. What matters is that none of us want a new world order and we want to stop it, right? And I think that that is the reason why you see Tulsi Gabbard, RFK Jr., Elon Musk, and all of these people jump up on the Trump administration, Joe Rogan, and so on and so forth, because the heart motivation was, we don't want tyranny and globalism. We don't want a new world order. We want to make America great again. And when they looked at Donald Trump, they said, we believe that the heart intent of Donald Trump is to make America great again, which is why we're jumping on his side of the wagon. And we don't really believe the heart intent of the people that are currently in charge of the Democratic Party at all either. Exactly that. So even though Katt Williams may not like Donald Trump, I'm thoroughly convinced that, beyond measure, that Katt Williams' heart motivation is 100% correct. Which is why I'm not like, oh no, I don't like Katt now, because, you know, that's just a bunch of nonsense, bro. What I love about Katt is the fact that he's outspoken and he says what he really thinks. What I love about Katt is that he will call you out if you're a liar, no matter who you are. Katt Williams will call out a liar on the left wing or the right wing, regardless of who it is. Katt Williams will call out a liar that's black or a liar that's white or whatever, no matter who it is. Because Katt Williams is heart motivationally in the right, correct place. He wants truth and rawness and realness, so he's going to call out whoever is perpetuating a nonsense, no matter who they are. And that's why I love Katt. And if you haven't seen that,